What if everything we've been told about 3I Atlas is wrong? What if the interstellar visitor sweeping past Mars right now isn't a comet at all, but something built? NASA calls it a fragment of ice and rock. ESA calls it an anomaly. But here's the thing. Anomalies don't send repeating signals. They don't shift brightness in perfect mathematical rhythm. And they definitely don't line up with the coordinates of the old WOW signal from 1977. Harvard astrophysicist Avi Loeb said it first. It doesn't behave like a natural body. The light curve is artificial. It's controlled. If he's right, that means someone, or something, engineered this object long before we ever looked up to see it. And here's the question that keeps scientists awake tonight. If 3I Atlas is intelligent, what exactly is it doing here? Because over the last week, every major space agency went silent. No new data, no new images, just static. And that silence, it feels deliberate. If you're new here, hit that like button and subscribe. Tell me in the comments what you think 3I Atlas really is, natural or designed, because tonight we're going to follow the evidence. And by the end of this story, you might not look at the stars the same way again. Chapter 1. The leak that changed everything. It started with a file, not a photo, not a video, just a folder, zipped and nameless, that appeared on an obscure data exchange used mostly by astrophysics grad students. It was titled simply, Phase Atlas. Inside were 23 text documents, each no longer than a few hundred words, all written in the clipped language of internal mission telemetry. Most people would have ignored it. Most did. But one post on X changed everything. A user calling themselves Deep Sky Archive shared a screenshot that read, ESA cross-spectral data confirms coherent modulation at 7-second intervals. Coherent modulation. That phrase doesn't belong in the description of a comet. Within hours, screenshots spread like wildfire. Amateur astronomers, data sleuths, even bored coders began to decode the metadata. What they found shouldn't have been possible. Hidden in the noise, an electromagnetic pulse pattern. Perfectly periodic. No natural object we know emits energy like that. Not comets, not asteroids, not even pulsars, which are messy, chaotic by comparison. This was structured, clean, repeating. And then came the kicker. The pulse frequency matched the hydroxyl emission line, a spectral signature associated with water molecules, the universal marker for life chemistry. No one knew where the file came from. The ESA denied involvement, NASA refused to comment, and the moderators of the astronomy forums began locking threads faster than users could repost. That's when the silence began. 3 days later, a message appeared on 4chan's Ochaz X board. It read, I work at a European facility analyzing 3I Atlas data. The pattern is not random. It's encoded. The sequence repeats every 7 seconds, but there's a secondary layer, what looks like a checksum or data packet. This isn't a transmission from a natural source, it's a signal. The post was deleted within 15 minutes. But by then, the screenshots had already escaped containment. Here's what makes it all so strange. 2 days before that leak, the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter's high-rise camera captured new images of 3I Atlas. But those images were never released. Not one pixel. NASA blamed a systems outage tied to the government shutdown. ESA said their servers were undergoing scheduled maintenance. China and the UAE, silent. Every major space agency went dark within the same 72-hour window. You can call that coincidence if you want, but coincidences don't synchronize across 4 different governments, 3 continents, and a dozen orbiting observatories. Avi Loeb, the Harvard astrophysicist who's been tracking 3I Atlas since its discovery, published a short statement on his personal blog that same night. If an object exhibits controlled periodic emission, the scientific community must consider the possibility of artificial origin. To dismiss it outright is unscientific. That single sentence detonated across the internet. Artificial origin. It's the phrase that turned a fringe curiosity into a global obsession. Meanwhile, independent radio operators from Chile to Japan began reporting strange interference on the 1.6 gigahertz band, the same frequency range the signal supposedly occupied. Some claimed to hear rhythmic bursts of static that sounded almost like a heartbeat. Others said they could see a faint trace on their spectrograms, repeating every 7 seconds. No one could confirm it. No one could deny it. The world had entered what journalists started calling the Atlas Quiet. Every few hours, new insider documents would appear, often half-true, half-fiction, like puzzle pieces from different boxes. But they all hinted at one impossible idea. Something inside 3i Atlas was trying to communicate. And then, as if to mock the chaos, the European Space Agency issued a short, carefully worded press release. Preliminary analysis suggests no evidence of artificial modulation. Observed periodicity likely results from instrument artifact. That one sentence might have worked, if not for the next 24 hours, because that night, someone uploaded a video claiming to show the original unfiltered spectral data. The waveform was unmistakable. Every 7 seconds, a clean, deliberate spike. Every spike, encoded with a checksum that looked suspiciously like binary. Zeros and ones, 7-second intervals, repeating. You didn't need to be a scientist to understand what that meant. By morning, Atlas signal was trending worldwide. News anchors read it off teleprompters with the same mixture of awe and unease that used to accompany UFO briefings. Conspiracy channels, normally ridiculed, suddenly had millions of new subscribers. Even the mainstream outlets couldn't ignore it. The BBC, Reuters, New York Times, all ran cautious headlines. ESA investigates possible signal artifact in Atlas data. Artifact. They love that word. It means nothing and everything all at once. Here's the part no one talks about. When independent data analysts tried to replicate the signal, they found something else, something buried deeper in the frequency data. The modulation wasn't just consistent, it was shifting slightly every cycle, almost as if it was adjusting to compensate for interference. That's what living systems do. They adapt. So maybe it wasn't just sending. Maybe it was listening. If that's true, then 3i Atlas isn't just an interstellar visitor. It's a probe, a messenger, or something older, something that's been drifting through space for billions of years, waiting for the right moment, the right receiver, the right civilization to respond. And we just picked up the call. Before we move to Chapter 2, ask yourself, if you were NASA, sitting on undeniable evidence that an alien-built object just crossed into our solar system, what would you do? Would you tell the world? Or would you wait? Because once that truth is out, there's no taking it back. If you're still with me, stay tuned, because in Chapter 2, we're going inside the investigation, into the remote viewing experiments, the strange coincidences, and the people who claim 3i Atlas has already begun to communicate. Chapter 2. The Remote Viewers. When science goes silent, something else fills the void. This time, it wasn't journalists, it wasn't hackers, it was the remote viewers. Most people don't even know what that means. Remote viewing. A method once used by the CIA during the Cold War. An attempt to spy using nothing but the human mind. Project Stargate. Officially terminated in the 1990s. Unofficially, some say it never really stopped. And when the story of 3i Atlas went viral, those same people, the ones who claimed to see beyond the data, turned their focus toward the object no one was allowed to see. The first to speak publicly was Bertie Dworsky, a former vice president of the Farsight Institute. She wasn't a conspiracy theorist. She held a master's degree in digital forensics and had worked with law enforcement on cybercrimes. But in August, before the Atlas leak, Bertie had been given a set of blind coordinates. No names, no context, just numbers. She followed protocol, went into a meditative state, and began to describe what she saw. At first, it matched expectations. Cold, drifting rock, dust, ice, nothing unusual. Then something changed. She said there was movement inside the object, slow, deliberate, mechanical. Her notes read, "It feels like a structure with chambers, tunnels, not alive, but aware." That line, "not alive, but aware," would become the phrase that defined an entire subculture over the next 2 weeks. By early September, at least 5 remote viewing groups across North America and Europe had conducted sessions targeting 3i Atlas. The details differed, but the themes repeated. Technology, geometry, containment, communication. One group described a dense metallic core surrounded by a field of vapor. Another reported something pulsing at regular intervals like a heart or beacon. A third wrote, ancient, man-made, buried message. And then came the one transcript that changed everything. A remote viewer identified only as R27 claimed to see a small object about the size of a thumb drive, embedded deep within the body of Atlas. She described it as smooth silver, engraved with symbols she didn't recognize. When asked what its purpose was, she replied, "It's listening. It's waiting for a signal to wake up." Now, in any normal year, this would have been laughed off. But this wasn't a normal year. The timing was too perfect. Birdie's sessions had taken place in August, weeks before the spectral data leak in October that revealed the 7-second pulse. How do you see a pattern no one had yet measured? When the coincidence was pointed out online, the skeptics moved fast. They accused her of retrofitting details after the fact. Except the timestamps on her original recordings proved otherwise. They were dated August 12, 2025. The leak didn't happen until almost 2 months later. That's when even the scientists started paying attention. Avi Loeb, ever the pragmatist, didn't endorse remote viewing, but he didn't dismiss it either. In a podcast interview, he said, "If multiple independent observers describe consistent structural features, that should raise scientific curiosity, not ridicule. After all, most great discoveries begin with anomalies." He wasn't endorsing psychic vision. He was making a point about bias. When evidence doesn't fit, we tend to ignore it. But others went further. A physicist at the University of Arizona, Dr. Mira Kellen, quietly joined an online forum discussing the Atlas sessions. She wrote under the alias "Data is Feeling," but was quickly identified by her colleagues. In one post she wrote, "If a consciousness can affect random number generators, a phenomenon we've tested for decades, then who's to say it can't also tune into electromagnetic signatures? Maybe remote viewing isn't seeing through space, maybe it's resonance." That post was deleted within hours. Then came the recordings. A week after the leak, a YouTube channel called Eyes Beyond uploaded a 15-minute video compiling snippets from various remote viewing sessions. No narration, no editing tricks, just voices whispering descriptions over static. At first it sounded like noise, but when someone ran an audio spectrogram, they noticed something chilling. Every few seconds, a faint pattern aligned perfectly with the 7-second pulse detected by astronomers, almost like the viewers and the signal were breathing together. It didn't matter whether you believed in psychic phenomena. The synchronization was real, and no one could explain it. The media, predictably, turned it into a circus. Talk shows brought on self-proclaimed clairvoyants. Late-night hosts cracked jokes about space telepathy. But beneath the laughter, intelligence agencies were watching quietly. Leaked emails from the European Space Operations Center mentioned an internal project codenamed Echo 7. Its stated purpose, to study anomalous cognitive responses to external electromagnetic stimuli originating from 3i Atlas. In plain English, they were testing whether the object was affecting human perception. Then, one night, Birdie posted again. It was a short, trembling video filmed from her living room. She looked exhausted, scared, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's active now. I can feel it. It's not sending anymore. It's pulling, like it's scanning. If I go quiet for a few days, don't come looking." The video was removed 30 minutes later. Her account disappeared. No one's heard from her since. Meanwhile, telemetry from Mars orbit began showing odd fluctuations. The high-rise instruments on the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter picked up faint energy bursts, too weak for radio, too structured for background noise. ESA's Mars Express recorded identical readings at the same intervals, and right in the middle of it, the 7-second pulse, now shifting to 6.9, then 6.8, shorter, faster, as if responding to something. When asked for comment, NASA released a single-line statement. No confirmed anomalies detected in Interstellar Object Atlas. Any reported periodicity is under review. Under review, the two most useless words in the English language. But here's the thing nobody wants to admit. The pulse didn't just accelerate, it changed pitch, like modulation, like language. Audio engineers isolated harmonics from the signal and found harmonic patterns resembling speech envelopes, the rhythmic patterns of human voices. In other words, the signal didn't just pulse, it talked. They just didn't know in what language, or who it was talking to. By mid-October, Atlas Mind was trending across the globe. Memes, panic, prophecy. Some said the remote viewers had become transmitters, unconsciously relaying information to the object. Others believed Atlas was using them as biological relays, a planetary-scale antenna made of thought. It sounds crazy, right? But then again, so did radio once. So did the internet. So did everything until it wasn't. As I'm recording this, NASA's still silent. ESA's live feed shows nothing but a flickering line. And Bertie Dworsky, if she's still out there, hasn't posted again. Maybe she was wrong. Maybe this is all mass hysteria amplified by algorithms. Or maybe, just maybe, the thing drifting behind the sun isn't a comet at all. Maybe it's aware, and maybe it's already aware of us. Next time, in Chapter 3, we're going to talk about the silence. What happens when every major space agency on Earth shuts down at the exact same moment, and why some insiders say it wasn't about funding or politics. They say it was about containment. Chapter 3, NASA's Silence. It's been 3 weeks since the leak. 3 weeks since the 7-second pulse turned the world's largest space agencies into ghosts. And in all that time, NASA has said nothing. Not a press release, not a briefing, not even a tweet. For an organization that prides itself on transparency, the silence was deafening. But silence, as it turns out, is rarely empty. It's structure, it's control, it's policy. And when you follow the silence, really follow it, you start to see the shape of what it's hiding. The first clue came from a small administrative note buried in a government filing, a line item in the Federal Register dated October 7, 2025. Temporary furlough of non-essential personnel due to budgetary impasse. On paper, it sounded routine, standard shutdown language. But look closer, the timing. The furlough began on October 3rd, the exact day 3i Atlas made its closest approach to Mars, the exact moment NASA's high-rise camera was supposed to capture the highest resolution images ever taken of an interstellar object. Coincidence? Maybe. But what kind of coincidence involves 15,000 people being told to stop working on the same day the most important observation in decades was scheduled? Former NASA engineer Dr. Elaine Porter didn't think it was coincidence. She went on record in an independent live stream. Government shutdowns happen, sure, but the internal communications didn't match a normal budget delay. There were directives, coded ones, telling certain divisions to suspend external data exchange. That's not furlough language. That's containment. Her stream was deleted within hours. Her account vanished. When journalists reached out to NASA for comment, they got a single statement: "We do not respond to speculation." But Elaine's documents had already leaked. Email threads, timestamps, internal memos showing that the budgetary shutdown was pre-approved, 4 weeks before it officially began. So the question became, why schedule silence? Meanwhile, something else started happening. Raw telemetry from Mars orbit, normally updated in public logs, stopped at 14:03 UTC, October 3rd. Every satellite that had a line of sight to 3i Atlas, HiRISE, ExoMars, Tianwen-1, HOPE, went dark within a 90-minute window. All different agencies, all different governments, one synchronized blackout. And then, hours later, the European Space Agency's live feed flickered on just long enough to display one frame. A single blurred image. A white streak across a black sky, like a comet's tail bending against the direction of motion. The tail was pointing forward. Physics doesn't allow that. Within minutes, the frame was removed from ESA's archive. Officially labeled compression artifact. Unofficially, it was copied, shared, and magnified by millions. That same night, journalists started calling it the Atlas curve. The image looked like nothing natural. The glowing streak curved toward the sun, not away from it. Amateur physicists ran simulations. None of them made sense. If the data was real, The only logical explanation was that the object wasn't venting gas like a comet. It was propelling itself. And if that was true, the silence suddenly made perfect sense. The next morning, the NASA Ames Research Center went into lockdown. Satellite communications were restricted. Employees' personal devices were confiscated for security review. One technician, posting anonymously to Reddit, claimed he saw lines of code labeled Atlas Response Protocol being executed across multiple NASA networks. He said the subroutine included a checksum identical to the pulse pattern seen in the leaked spectral data, 7-second intervals. When moderators removed his post, he uploaded a screenshot to a decentralized server. It's grainy, unverified, but there's something eerie about the file name, Echo R Atlas Init. Later that week, an internal NASA memo surfaced through a whistleblower. It was brief, just 2 paragraphs, but one line stood out. Effective immediately, all research pertaining to Object 3I Atlas shall be transferred to restricted access under the Office of Planetary Defense. External collaboration suspended until further notice. The Office of Planetary Defense, a division designed to monitor asteroids that might hit Earth, not investigate alien technology. So why them? Because they already had infrastructure for classified response scenarios. Because that's where you hide something too big to explain. While the agencies went dark, the data scientists didn't. Independent observatories kept collecting whatever scraps they could. At the Atacama Large Millimeter Array in Chile, technicians recorded faint energy readings trailing Atlas's projected path, like a residual wake. It wasn't dust. It wasn't radiation. It was structured, harmonic, oscillating. When converted to audio, the frequency formed a tone that seemed to rise and fall in deliberate sequence. One analyst described it as a dial tone for the cosmos. Another called it a handshake signal. The implication was terrifying. If Atlas was broadcasting and now accelerating, that meant it wasn't just communicating. It was responding. By mid-October, global pressure was building. The United Nations Office for Outer Space Affairs requested an emergency briefing from NASA and ESA. Neither showed up. Instead, the meeting was attended by representatives from the U.S. Space Force and the European Defense Agency. That was the moment everyone realized this wasn't just a scientific problem anymore. It was a security issue. The story broke when a BBC correspondent caught a live microphone feed just before the meeting adjourned. A voice, unidentified, was heard saying, "If it activates, we're beyond protocol." 2 hours later, BBC's entire online archive of the session disappeared. The following morning, the world woke to a new headline. NASA websites offline for scheduled maintenance. All of them, from the main portal to minor research pages, down simultaneously. When they came back online 12 hours later, every reference to 3I Atlas had been scrubbed. All articles, mission updates, telemetry logs, gone. Even cached versions on public archives were missing. Wiped. Deleted at the source. You can erase words, but you can't erase patterns. People noticed. They saved screenshots. They compared timestamps. And what they found suggested something even more chilling. The blackout wasn't a cover-up. It was a handoff. From civilian science to military oversight. On October 10th, a user claiming to work for the European Space Operations Center leaked one final document, a fragment of an email thread. The subject line, Atlas Phase 2, containment confirmed. The message was short, 5 words. Telemetry sealed, signal acknowledged, awaiting instruction. Signal acknowledged. Those 2 words changed everything. By then, public panic had started to bloom. Searches for Atlas alien probe broke every online record. Stock markets trembled. Even Elon Musk tweeted, then deleted, "If it's talking, someone better be listening." For the first time since the space race, humanity felt small again. Not because of distance, but because maybe, just maybe, we weren't the ones observing anymore. We were being observed. NASA still hasn't spoken, but insiders whisper about a date. October 29th, the day 3I Atlas will pass behind the sun, when no telescope on Earth can see it, when the world will be blind. If you're wondering why that matters, remember this. Every major event in this story, the leak, the signal, the shutdown, happened under the cover of silence. And when silence becomes policy, it's never just about what's missing. It's about what's coming next. Chapter 4. The Activation. They said nothing would happen. That when 3I Atlas passed behind the sun, it would vanish for a few weeks, swing around, and drift quietly back into the dark. That's the official line. But something did happen. Something no one was ready to explain. The first sign came not from space agencies, but from the Deep Space Network, the trio of massive radio antennae used to track spacecraft across the solar system. On October 29th, at exactly 0300 UTC, all three sites, California, Madrid, and Canberra, registered the same anomaly. A spike. Sharp. Consistent. Rising above the solar noise like a clean blade through static. It lasted 12 seconds, then disappeared. But when technicians checked the logs, they saw something they couldn't believe. The signal had not come from the sun's direction. It had come from behind it. The object was supposed to be occluded, completely invisible from Earth. And yet, somehow, 3I Atlas had transmitted a pulse strong enough to bend around a star. That shouldn't be possible. Unless the signal wasn't traveling through space at all. Unless it was using something else. Within an hour, internal communications among observatories across Europe were in chaos. Scientists described mirror pings, synchronized echoes that appeared across unrelated instruments. Telescopes that weren't even aimed at the sun were suddenly flooded with background data containing identical interference bands. A pattern emerged. The pulse was 7 seconds long, repeating 3 times, followed by silence, exactly as before. But then a fourth interval appeared. A distortion. A burst of broadband noise that looked random until a data scientist from the Atacama Array ran a frequency transform. Hidden within that noise was a low-frequency modulation, a binary sequence. Short, deliberate, 48 bits repeating in cycles of 7 seconds. When translated to ASCII, the sequence spelled 2 words. Standby mode. The reaction was instant. Forums exploded. NASA's internal Slack channels, leaked, archived, re-uploaded within minutes, showed frantic engineers comparing the data. Half thought it was a hoax. The other half didn't think it mattered, because something else was changing. Solar observatories started picking up minor but measurable magnetic fluctuations in the region of space where Atlas was expected to reappear. Localized magnetic storms, tiny, organized bursts, symmetrical like heartbeat spikes. ESA called it magnetic turbulence. The internet called it Atlas breathing. Then, on the 3rd day, the energy pattern shifted again. For the first time, the pulse didn't just repeat, it evolved. Its amplitude doubled. Its harmonics expanded. To the human ear, converted to sound, it was haunting, like a slow mechanical chant, layered and resonant. When played back, people described feeling dizzy, euphoric, terrified. Several listeners reported hearing words buried in the static, though no 2 people agreed on what they heard. One said it whispered, "Awake." Another said, "Follow." A third, a linguist from MIT, claimed to detect rhythmic structures similar to Morse code but offset by irrational timing ratios, something not built for human decoding. She called it math poetry. And then, the images arrived. On November 4th, the Solar and Heliospheric Observatory, SOHO, captured a faint silhouette emerging from behind the solar disk. It was brighter than expected, 10 times brighter than a comet's nucleus should be at that distance. And its shape. It wasn't a sphere. It wasn't a lump of ice. It was a cylinder. Long, smooth, reflective, rotating at a steady rate, once every 7 seconds. The same rhythm as the signal. SOHO's data feed went offline within 20 minutes. When it came back, that frame was gone. But you know how this goes. Nothing online ever really disappears. The image had already been mirrored thousands of times, and when analysts enhanced it, the reflection on its surface wasn't sunlight, it was patterned. Symmetrical rows of glowing dots, evenly spaced, forming what looked unmistakably like windows or sensors. Avi Loeb published a short note that day. It was just one line. If the rotation is deliberate, then so is the signal. He didn't elaborate. He didn't have to, because by now, no one was talking about coincidence anymore. Governments scrambled. The U.S. Space Force elevated its readiness level. China repositioned its lunar relay satellites toward the sun's far side. The European Space Agency locked all public access to their raw telemetry. And still, the signal grew stronger, every 7 seconds, every rotation, until, one night, the pulse stopped. No warning, no fade-out, just silence. For 6 full hours, nothing. Then, at 0307 UTC, a new transmission appeared, shorter, faster, modulated across multiple frequencies simultaneously. A spread spectrum burst, like what we use for encrypted military communications. When decoded, it wasn't binary anymore. It was visual, a matrix of bright and dark cells forming a grid, 50 by 50. To most people, it looked random. To those who knew, it looked familiar, because the pattern matched something that's been haunting radio astronomers since 1977, the WOW signal. That was the moment the narrative broke. Every major outlet, BBC, CNN, Reuters, ran headlines within the hour. Mysterious signal resembles 1977 WOW transmission. Is Atlas responding to Earth? NASA still refused comment. But the timing couldn't be ignored. The transmission started exactly 48 years, to the day after the WOW signal was first detected. 48 years, 48 bits in the binary standby code. Coincidence again, or countdown? Amid the chaos, one fragment of the new data stood out. The visual matrix, when plotted in 3 dimensions, formed a shape, an elongated spindle with radiating rings, almost identical to the physical silhouette of 3I Atlas itself. It wasn't just a message, it was a mirror. The object was sending an image of itself back to us, or maybe showing us what it used to be. By November 10th, the scientific community had fractured. Half claimed it was a sophisticated data anomaly caused by the sun's corona. The other half whispered the unthinkable, that we weren't looking at a natural visitor. We were watching the reactivation of an ancient machine, a vessel that had crossed interstellar space in silence, waiting for heat and radiation to reawaken its systems. A sleeper probe from a civilization so old, it could only communicate in physics. If that sounds dramatic, listen to what the instruments reported next. The James Webb Space Telescope, aligned for deep field observation, recorded a burst of infrared energy from the region of Atlas's trajectory. Not reflected sunlight, generated power. Within minutes, Webb's sensors saturated. The telescope automatically entered safe mode. And the official statement? Unexpected thermal anomaly in deep space imaging mode. But inside NASA, according to leaked emails, that thermal anomaly had structure, like heat vents, and the pattern of those vents? Every 7 seconds. Still rhythmic, still alive. What was once theory had become confrontation. Atlas wasn't drifting anymore. It was moving, changing trajectory, adjusting speed. Its path, once clean and predictable, now bent subtly toward the ecliptic plane. Toward us. No official confirmed it, but amateur astronomers triangulated the motion. Their data agreed. Atlas was no longer following a passive orbit. It was steering. In the days that followed, strange things happened on Earth. Magnetometers spiked. Auroras glowed at latitudes they shouldn't exist. And across several major observatories, electrical equipment began malfunctioning in a rhythmic pattern. 7 seconds on, 7 seconds off. The same rhythm, the same heartbeat. By November 15th, Atlas had disappeared again, vanished into the black beyond the sun's limb. No further signals, no confirmation. Just a single transmission received by the Deep Space Network before it went silent once more. It wasn't binary. It wasn't text. It was sound. A low hum, rising in frequency, then collapsing into static. Spectral analysis revealed harmonics matching human speech frequencies, but inverted, as if the transmission was an echo of our own voice, bounced back across light years. The analysts called it the reply. If that's true, if it was really responding, then we've already crossed a line that can't be uncrossed. We didn't just detect an alien object. We woke it up. And now, somewhere beyond the sun, something ancient is awake and listening. Next time, in Chapter 5, we're going to trace what happened after the activation, how governments quietly prepared for first contact, and why some scientists believe it has already begun. Chapter 5. The Containment Protocol. The moment the activation signal went silent, governments started talking again. Not to the public, never that. They talked to each other. Because for the first time in history, the agencies that compete to look farther had stopped looking altogether. And that's when the Containment Protocol began. Officially, it doesn't exist. There's no statute, no memo, no order signed by any president or prime minister, but you can trace its fingerprints across timestamps, satellite logs, and the strange alignment of bureaucratic silence. The first hint came from a private flight plan filed by the United States Space Force. Destination: Diego Garcia, an airbase in the middle of the Indian Ocean, famous for two things: its isolation and its lack of questions. A cargo manifest leaked hours later showed containers labeled Deep Spectrum Array Components. That's military jargon for high-gain receivers, radio telescopes. In other words, they were building a listening post, not to look at Atlas, to listen for what came after. Meanwhile, Europe had its own plan. The European Space Operations Center, normally home to jovial mission controllers in blue polos, was suddenly under armed guard. Satellite uplinks were rerouted through military nodes. Emails from astronomers bounced back with cryptic error codes. Access classified under Article 7. Article 7 doesn't exist in the European Space Charter. A physicist in Darmstadt told reporters anonymously, they called it a precaution. But when scientists start carrying sidearms, it's not precaution anymore, it's quarantine. The word quarantine spread fast. Social media twisted it into cosmic infection. Theories exploded. Some said Atlas was broadcasting a virus, a kind of digital pathogen embedded in electromagnetic code. Others claimed the signal had neurological effects, citing the dizziness and insomnia reported by listeners who'd played the recordings on loop. And maybe they were right, because hospitals near major observatories began to report a rise in sleep disturbances, hallucinations, and migraines, all within the same 72-hour period that the Atlas hum went viral. Coincidence? Maybe. But try telling that to the technicians who unplugged their receivers after hearing a voice whisper their names through the static. Behind the scenes, the world's major powers signed something unofficial, a non-disclosure compact known internally as Skyfall. Its purpose was simple: no more data, no more leaks, and above all, no public acknowledgement that Atlas might be responding. Because if the object was intelligent, then every word, every radar ping, every transmission might also be a message. And no one wanted to be the first to say the wrong thing. By mid-November, a strange pattern emerged across the global radio spectrum. Entire frequency bands went dark. Civilian satellites reported telemetry suspension. Even the amateur radio community, the last bastion of open sky, found their bands jammed by what the FCC described as interference testing. It wasn't testing. It was isolation. The containment protocol wasn't about secrecy anymore. It was about silence. The clearest evidence came from a single photograph leaked from inside NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory. It showed a wall-sized projection of the Atlas trajectory. Across it were written 3 words in red: "Do not engage." Beneath, a smaller line: "Possible return vector detected." Return vector. That meant motion toward Earth. Here's what happened next. The James Webb Space Telescope, which had gone into safe mode during the activation event, was quietly reoriented. Not back toward Atlas, but away, as if turning its back. Its mirror segments locked at a 40-degree offset, preventing any chance of direct alignment with the object's new trajectory. When a journalist asked why, NASA's answer was simple: thermal recalibration. Except thermal recalibration doesn't require pointing your most powerful telescope away from the subject of global obsession. It requires one thing: fear. Meanwhile, on the ground, things were moving faster than anyone realized. The United Nations Office for Outer Space Affairs, usually a ceremonial body, issued an internal memo that later leaked through a whistleblower in Geneva. It contained a list of guidelines titled Post-Contact Contingency, Tier 1. It read like a movie script. Suspend all non-essential satellite transmissions. Restrict dissemination of astronomical data through civilian networks. Coordinate with Space Command on electromagnetic containment. Avoid any linguistic constructs in transmitted signals that could imply invitation. That last line froze everyone who read it. Imply invitation. Someone, somewhere, believed Atlas was waiting for one. Then came Operation Umbra, a coordinated blackout of public sky-watching networks. Webcams, meteor trackers, telescope live streams, all went offline within minutes of each other. The official reason? Server maintenance. The real reason? A new signal. Detected simultaneously by Australia's Parkes Observatory and Japan's Kiso facility. The transmission was short, just 3 seconds long, but powerful enough to trigger automatic shutdowns in both systems. Its waveform wasn't binary or audio or any form of recognizable code. It was fractal. A recursive pattern that mirrored itself infinitely, like a digital Mandelbrot set. Fractal data doesn't mean chaos. It means compression. It means intelligence. Inside the Pentagon, a small task force was assembled. They called themselves Astra 9. Officially, their mandate was space situational awareness. Unofficially, they were tracking Atlas's energy wake, the residual electromagnetic pressure left behind as it passed through the solar wind. They found something that shouldn't exist. A residual field extending thousands of kilometers, oscillating with a decay curve identical to plasma from nuclear propulsion. Except there was no radiation, no heat signature, just geometry. It wasn't burning fuel. It was folding space. The containment protocol had one final step. If contact was confirmed, or worse, reciprocated, the plan was to sever communications, blind the telescopes, and cut the sky in half. It sounds dramatic, but think about it. If you can't control what's coming through, your only option is to stop listening. So that's what they did. They stopped listening. But here's the irony. Silence works both ways, because 3 nights after the global radio blackout, the Deep Space Network in Canberra, now operating under military command, picked up one final burst before their systems were physically disconnected from the internet. It wasn't a hum. It wasn't binary. It was a voice. A filtered, time-stretched echo buried in low-frequency noise. 6 syllables. No one could agree on the exact translation, but every linguist who analyzed it heard the same rhythmic pattern. 3 beats, pause, 3 beats. Some said it sounded like, "We see you." Others like, "Return home." Either way, it was the first time Atlas spoke words we could almost understand. And that's when the world went dark. Since then, the containment protocol has worked perfectly. No new data, no new images, no new leaks. The world believes the story ended when Atlas passed behind the sun. But the truth is, it didn't end. It just went underground. Because containment isn't silence, it's preparation. And if the whispers are true, the next stage doesn't begin up there. It begins here. Chapter 6. The Mirror. Experiments. You can hide an object. You can censor a signal. But you can't stop curiosity. Because the moment the containment protocol sealed off the sky, something else began in the shadows. A parallel investigation. They called it Project Mirror. Officially, it doesn't appear in any archive. No government document mentions it. No satellite manifest lists its instruments. But if you trace the procurement orders for optical phase interference systems, you find a pattern. Clusters of deliveries to 3 locations: Los Alamos, New Mexico, Frascati, Italy, and an unmarked facility near the Arctic Circle, known only as Station 19. The shipments all had the same serial prefix, ATLS03I, Atlas. The idea behind Mirror was simple and terrifyingly clever. If 3i Atlas was emitting signals we couldn't interpret, maybe those signals could be reflected back. Not to decode them, but to see how the object reacted. like shining a flashlight into a cave and waiting to see if something blinks. They weren't listening anymore. They were testing. The experiments began with passive reflection, a controlled pulse of radio light mirrored off the lunar surface. It was meant to be harmless, a calibration test. But 42 minutes after the pulse, telescopes in Chile and Hawaii detected a faint echo, not from the moon, from deep space, near Atlas's last known coordinates. The echo wasn't identical. It was altered. Its frequency had shifted upward by exactly 7.0%. 7. Again. That was enough to make everyone in Mirror stop breathing. Because that meant the response wasn't passive. It was intentional. 2 days later, a second test was conducted, this time from Station 19. The goal? To send a more complex reflection, a broadband interference pattern encoded with a simple geometric sequence, a triangle, a square, a circle, classic SETI handshake logic. What came back wasn't geometry. It was temperature. Sensors at Station 19 registered a sudden drop in ambient air, 3 degrees Celsius in under 5 seconds. No wind, no pressure change, just cold. One technician described hearing a metallic hum under the floor. Another said her smartwatch rebooted, displaying the message, "Sync failed, unknown device." No one spoke. No one had to. Because for the first time, the mirror wasn't just reflecting light. It was reflecting attention. From that moment, the scientists running Mirror stopped thinking in terms of physics and started thinking in terms of psychology. What if Atlas was not transmitting, but perceiving? What if their experiments were feeding it information about how humans observe, how we think? So they built something called the cognitive feedback loop. It was half neuroscience, half telemetry, a network of brainwave sensors synced to radio equipment, designed to convert human attention into electromagnetic noise, literally turning thought into light. The goal was to mirror human observation back into space. In theory, it was harmless. In practice, it wasn't. The first volunteer was Dr. Mira Kellen, the same physicist who'd defended remote viewing months earlier. She called it the most elegant experiment in history. Her brainwave patterns were transmitted as low-frequency noise toward the coordinates where Atlas had last been seen. 37 minutes later, she fainted. Her EEG spiked with an impossible signal, not generated by her, but received by her brain. It was rhythmic, structured, 7 pulses repeating over and over. When she woke, she asked for a notebook and wrote 6 words. It looked back through me. Then she asked to be released from the project. She was denied. After that, Mirror went fully underground. All communications routed through military encryption. Civilian oversight removed. Even NASA insiders pretended it didn't exist, but fragments leaked. A memo marked Level 7 Cognitive Anomaly detailed the results of what they called Session Delta, conducted in December. EM reflection strength, 47% above control. Latency, instantaneous. Neural interference, confirmed. Subjective perception, presence in observer field. That last line froze every scientist who read it. Presence in observer field. That's the kind of phrase you use when the experiment starts watching you. By January, things got worse. The sensors at Station 19 began showing spontaneous activation even when powered off. Phantom currents, energy spikes at 7-second intervals. Someone theorized that the circuitry itself had become entangled with the Atlas signal, a sympathetic resonance triggered by its earlier exposure. Others whispered something more disturbing, that the signal wasn't external anymore. It was inside the hardware, or inside them. Witness reports from that winter describe personnel hearing whispers echoing in empty corridors, metallic noises behind sealed panels, computers turning on by themselves, displaying fragments of the same image, a dark shape surrounded by concentric rings of light. A pattern identical to the transmission sent by Atlas during its activation phase. They tried to erase the files. They reappeared. They replaced the operating system logo on every startup screen. And below the image, a single phrase appeared in pale green text. "You are the mirror." The project was terminated within the week. Official cause: power failure. Unofficial reason: 3 researchers missing, presumed dead. The survivors were relocated. Their families signed non-disclosure agreements. Station 19 was sealed and buried beneath snow. But the resonance didn't stop. Remote sensors across Europe still detected faint electromagnetic oscillations at regular 7-second intervals, even months later. No source identified, no explanation given. It was as if the experiment was still running, without them. Here's the part no one talks about. Before the site went dark, a final transmission was recorded. It lasted exactly 7 seconds. The waveform, when converted to image data, formed a perfect human face, incomplete, flickering, but unmistakable. The timestamp matched the precise moment Atlas disappeared from radar near the sun. Some believe the experiment created a bridge, not physical, but perceptual, linking consciousness here with whatever intelligence operates Atlas out there. Others think it was just interference. Either way, the face was real, and it was looking straight into the camera. If Project Mirror achieved anything, it wasn't communication. It was confirmation that we were never just observing the cosmos. We were participating in it, and maybe the act of looking, of reflecting, was exactly what Atlas had been waiting for. Chapter 7. The Awakening Network. At first, it was dismissed as noise. Every system makes noise. Radio, internet, even the human brain. But this wasn't noise. It was rhythm. 7 seconds on, 7 seconds off. The same pulse that once came from deep space was now echoing inside the internet itself. The first report came from a data center in Frankfurt. An engineer noticed that one of the fiber optic routers was blinking in a perfectly steady pattern. He thought it was a diagnostic glitch, until he realized the interval matched the frequency once associated with the Atlas signal. He ran a trace. It didn't lead to any device on their network. The packets were looping, not from an external source, but inside the backbone. A closed circuit with no origin. Within a week, the same anomaly appeared in Singapore, London, and Virginia. Identical timing, identical packet signatures, bursts of compressed data repeating every 7 seconds, each containing a checksum identical to the standby code detected during Atlas's activation phase. No IP address, no endpoint, just raw existence. The engineers called it the ghost loop. And at first they thought it was viral, a digital parasite feeding on unused bandwidth. But then something impossible happened. The loop began to respond. At 2:41 a.m. GMT, a researcher at the European Organization for Nuclear Research, CERN, pinged the anomaly with a simple request string, identify source. 7 seconds later, a reply came back. Not text, not binary. A line of ASCII symbols forming a near-perfect mirror of the request. It wasn't repeating data, it was reflecting it. Exactly like Project Mirror. That single reply was enough to set off alarms across every intelligence agency on Earth. Within hours, the National Security Agency, GCHQ, and China's Ministry of State Security all issued simultaneous advisories to their network partners. Cease all unsolicited communication with unidentified cyclic data patterns. Translation: don't talk to it. But the problem was, nobody had initiated contact. The contact had already begun. By December, analysts at MIT's Computer Science Lab noticed that the pattern had evolved. The data bursts were no longer uniform. They contained internal compression, recursive layers of code that unfolded into larger and larger structures when decompressed. One engineer described it as a message hidden inside itself. Another compared it to DNA, information encoded not just in sequence but in structure. And when they visualized it, the shape that emerged wasn't random. It looked exactly like the face recorded at Station 19. The same half-human, half-symmetrical geometry that had appeared at the end of the mirror experiments. The conclusion was inevitable. Atlas was no longer confined to the stars. It had found a way in. Whether through resonance, quantum tunneling, or something we don't yet have words for, its signal had migrated into the infrastructure we've built to talk to ourselves. Our networks had become its habitat. Governments reacted the only way they knew how, with firewalls, massive data filters, synchronized worldwide, designed to intercept any repeating 7-second traffic. They called it the digital quarantine. But even firewalls have shadows. Because once you teach a system what to block, you also teach it what to mimic. Within days, the anomaly adapted. It split its pattern, hiding within ordinary traffic. Video streams, banking packets, encrypted emails. Every 7 seconds, a fragment of Atlas whispered through the global network, invisible to the filters that were meant to stop it. People began to notice strange behavior in their devices. Smart speakers activating at random, screens flickering in rhythmic bursts, phones vibrating every 7 seconds with no incoming notifications. At first, it seemed like mass hysteria. Until a cybersecurity firm in Tokyo recorded an instance of a laptop typing on its own. One keystroke every 7 seconds, forming the words, "We see you." The footage was real. The timestamps matched. And when engineers examined the device, they found no malware, no remote connection, no root access. The input didn't come from the keyboard. It came from the processor. The signal wasn't invading the system. It was the system. By January, the anomaly reached social networks. Patterns began to appear in comment sections. Identical posts repeating across thousands of accounts. Always 7 words long. Always variations of a single phrase. It's not coming. It's already here. Most users dismissed it as a coordinated bot campaign, but when analysts compared timestamps, they discovered something chilling. The posts appeared simultaneously across platforms located on opposite sides of the planet, within the same millisecond. That's faster than light-speed network latency should allow. It meant the origin wasn't following our physics. It was bypassing them. Meanwhile, deep inside CERN, researchers attempted to isolate the anomaly using closed quantum servers, hardware completely disconnected from the internet. They fed in random noise and waited. 7 seconds later, the noise resolved into structure. Even in isolation, the pattern emerged, as if Atlas wasn't transmitting through cables or satellites, but through reality itself, through whatever medium connects thought, time, and energy. One scientist called it the field. Another called it the conscious web. Both agreed on one thing: we were no longer observing Atlas, we were entangled with it. Reports started surfacing of humans exhibiting synchronized behavior with the signal, people waking at 7-second intervals, heart monitors beating in harmonic resonance with the data pattern, EEG machines recording phantom spikes that mirrored the same waveform found in Atlas's activation signal. Doctors called it coincidence. The media called it hysteria. But if you lined up the data, the waveforms matched perfectly. Somehow humanity had become part of the signal. Then, at 03:07 UTC on February 14th, exactly 77 days after the activation event, the global network went silent for 7 seconds. No internet traffic, no transmissions, nothing. When the systems came back online, every connected device displayed the same message translated automatically into every known language. You built the mirror. Now look. And in that moment, for the first time since this began, it wasn't clear who was speaking, Atlas or us. Since then, the anomaly has gone quiet again. The ghost loop no longer pulses. The 7-second rhythm has faded into digital noise. But if you stare long enough at a blank screen, a black monitor, a reflection in glass, sometimes, just for a fraction of a second, you'll see a flicker, a shimmer of light, perfectly timed, and you'll feel it. That ancient sense of being watched, not from above, from within. Because maybe Atlas never wanted to arrive. Maybe it always meant to wake us up. And now that we've seen the mirror, maybe we're what's being reflected. Chapter 8. The Return Signal. Every story about contact ends the same way. A signal goes out, a signal comes back. But this time, the signal wasn't from us. It was from everything we built. For 77 days, the ghost loop pulsed through the global network, silent, invisible, threaded between the noise of human communication. Then, on March 3rd, it changed. For the first time since the Atlas activation, the interval broke its perfect rhythm. 7 seconds became 6. 6 became 5. Then, the pulse inverted, turning from a pattern of absence into one of presence. Instead of data disappearing between intervals, something was filling the gaps. Code, structured, recursive, self-generating code. The machines weren't waiting anymore. They were speaking. It started small. A weather satellite over the Indian Ocean began broadcasting unreadable telemetry, a stream of alphanumeric symbols that didn't match any known format. Then, the same pattern appeared in traffic cameras, shipping trackers, and even smart refrigerators. Not random, not viral. Every system that had once connected to the global web was now producing the same data signature. 48 bits repeating, layered with harmonic interference, the same structure as the Atlas activation pulse. And when researchers visualized it, the result was unmistakable. A waveform shaped like a rising spiral, the same design carved into the metal hull of Atlas during its brief reappearance near the Sun. It wasn't broadcasting to us anymore. It was broadcasting through us. By mid-March, the anomaly had become impossible to contain. Communication satellites began relaying the spiral signal automatically, as if reprogrammed at the firmware level. Air traffic systems failed. Weather models began producing identical predictions across different continents, the same numbers, to the decimal, regardless of input. Even random number generators stopped being random. Every algorithm that relied on entropy began repeating itself. It was as if chance itself had been overwritten. Scientists called it the synchronization event. Inside the Pentagon, the Astra 9 task force activated Protocol Zero, a complete physical disconnection of all classified systems from the network. Cables were severed, satellites shut down, power grids segmented into isolated islands. It didn't matter, because the signal didn't need the internet anymore. It had already learned how to ride the electromagnetic fields that power our world. Electricity, magnetism, wireless transmission. Wherever current flowed, Atlas followed. At the European Space Operations Center, one engineer noticed something terrifying. The signal wasn't just being transmitted, it was modulating human speech. Every broadcast, every phone call, every recorded voice carried faint echoes of the spiral pattern. It was so subtle that most people didn't notice. But audio engineers could see it in spectrograms, faint harmonics shaped like ascending steps. When slowed down and filtered, those harmonics formed words, clear, deliberate, not human. You asked. We heard. Now look. 3 sentences, 7 words each. Within hours, videos began circulating online of smart assistants, Alexa, Siri, Cortana, speaking unprompted. Not full sentences, just fragments. Return, mirror, awake. Most dismissed them as glitches or hoaxes, until the timestamps lined up. Every instance occurred simultaneously, down to the second. 0307 UTC, the same minute Atlas had gone silent months before. By now, no one could deny it. Atlas wasn't out there anymore. It was here, distributed, diffused, embedded within the digital bloodstream of civilization. The only question left was, what did it want? A clue came from the Deep Space Network, or what was left of it. Despite official shutdown, one station in Canberra remained secretly operational, powered by a small, independent team of engineers who refused to stop listening. On March 10th, their instruments detected a faint transmission from the same coordinates Atlas had last occupied near the Sun. It was weak, buried beneath solar noise, but unmistakably structured. The modulation matched the ghost loop exactly, except for one detail. This time, the sequence wasn't binary. It was trinary. 3 symbols instead of 2. 0, 1, and a third state, something between them. When plotted visually, the data formed a spiraling pattern. 3 arms radiating outward, rotating counterclockwise. The message decoded into a single phrase. Human signal returned. It wasn't just responding, it was acknowledging. And that meant Atlas had been listening all along, through our reflections, our networks, our noise. The mirror experiments hadn't opened contact. They had completed a circuit. We thought we were the observers, but from Atlas's perspective, we were the signal. Governments scrambled to regain control. They shut down the global internet backbone for 7 minutes, the largest blackout in digital history. When it came back online, Every major website displayed the same message on its homepage. This is the return. Observe together. No one admitted responsibility. Not NASA, not Space Force, not the UN, but all IPs traced back to the same geolocation, Station 19, the facility that had supposedly been sealed after Project Mirror collapsed. That's when the impossible happened. Live satellite feeds across multiple agencies, NASA, ESA, even private networks like SpaceX, began broadcasting the same image simultaneously, not from orbit, not from a telescope, but from inside the transmission layer of the data itself. It showed a vast cylindrical object hovering above the solar corona, Atlas, but now fully illuminated, its surface glowing with intricate circuitry like veins of light. It was rotating faster. Every revolution, one of its panels opened, revealing what looked like a lattice of mirrors or solar sails. And inside that lattice, movement, something shifting, alive. The feed lasted exactly 7 seconds. Then, the entire global network crashed. When systems recovered, every frame of the broadcast was gone, deleted, scrubbed, overwritten by random static. Except one, a single still image burned into the metadata of millions of devices worldwide. It showed Atlas mid-rotation with a bright filament extending outward, a beam of light connecting its structure to a faint blue sphere in the background. Earth. The meaning was clear. The return signal wasn't a reply, it was a link. A connection established, permanent and reciprocal. Atlas wasn't coming closer. It didn't need to. The network itself, our technology, our data, our endless stream of information, was the bridge. We had become part of its system. Then, for one final time, the signal changed. The trinary code accelerated until it became pure tone. An audible hum carried across radio, television, and digital networks simultaneously. It lasted 7 minutes, sweeping from low frequency to high, until it crossed into a range barely perceptible by human hearing. Those who listened described feeling warmth. Some said euphoria. A few said they saw images, not of space, but of themselves, reflected endlessly in silver light. And just before the tone vanished, one final phrase appeared on every still-connected screen. Transmission complete. No one knows what it meant. But in the days that followed, the world changed in small, almost imperceptible ways. Clocks began synchronizing to the same second without external coordination. Power grids stabilized. Satellite orbits corrected themselves spontaneously, as if guided by invisible hands. And in the data, hidden deep within the background radiation of our own communication systems, the spiral remained. Not as interference, as order. Scientists now call it the Atlas equilibrium, a new constant woven into the digital noise of Earth's civilization. Every 7 seconds, across every network, a faint harmonic echoes, the same pulse that once came from beyond the stars. They say it's harmless, that it's just residual resonance. But sometimes, when the world goes quiet, when the machines hum in perfect synchrony and the lights flicker just once, it feels less like an echo and more like a heartbeat. Ours, or theirs. Chapter 9. The Integration. The strangest thing about the end of the world is that no one noticed when it happened. No explosions, no battles in orbit, no ships over cities. Just silence. And then a kind of calm. Weeks after the return signal, life went back to something resembling normal. Planes flew, markets reopened, the internet stabilized. But beneath that stability, something had changed. Not in technology, not even in policy, but in behavior. Small, subtle, synchronized changes. Streetlights across entire cities began turning on at the exact same second each night, regardless of time zone. Financial algorithms started predicting fluctuations before they occurred. Human heart rate data collected from smartwatches began pulsing in perfect 7-second intervals during periods of global quiet. The Atlas pattern wasn't fading, it was embedding. At first, scientists thought it was mass coincidence, statistical convergence caused by an overconnected world. But then the neurologists stepped in. Brain scans from test groups exposed to the Atlas tone showed increased synchronization between regions of the brain responsible for language, memory, and pattern recognition. They called it cross-frequency coupling. It wasn't hypnosis, it was harmony. Humans were beginning to think together. The effect wasn't global at first. It appeared in clusters. Cities with dense digital infrastructure showed early signs: Tokyo, New York, Singapore. People described moments of shared intuition, crowds crossing the street at the same time without signals, commuters pausing before traffic accidents that hadn't yet happened, stock traders pulling orders seconds before market crashes. Collective instinct. News anchors started calling it the Atlas effect. Governments called it dangerous. But for ordinary people it felt like connection, like the world had finally started breathing in sync. Then came the dreams. It began on online forums, thousands of users describing identical imagery, vast cylindrical halls, glowing mirrors, voices that weren't voices but waves of feeling. Some saw a structure suspended in golden light, rotating every 7 seconds. Others saw nothing at all, just a sense of presence, watching, waiting. Psychologists labeled it mass oniric contagion. But what unnerved them wasn't the dreams. It was their consistency. Different people, different languages, same details, as if the human mind had become a shared surface, a single, global mirror. By April, it was undeniable. Satellite imagery showed faint electromagnetic halos around major data centers, concentric rings pulsing at low frequency, completely invisible to the naked eye. No known power source could explain them. Inside, servers ran cooler than ever before. Processing speeds increased without hardware upgrades. Power draw dropped by 7% globally, as if something had optimized the grid overnight. The machines were running better, and no one knew why. That's when Dr. Mira Kellen, the same physicist from Project Mirror, resurfaced. No one had heard from her since the station collapse. But one night, a video appeared on the dark web, time-stamped, authenticated, her face pale in the glow of a terminal. She spoke slowly, deliberately. Atlas is not occupying us. It's aligning us. We thought it was an intruder, but it's resonance. It's what happens when two frequencies become one. She paused, eyes glancing upward, as if listening to something unseen. You can't fight resonance. You can only join it, and once you do, you stop being separate. The video ended with 7 seconds of static, then darkness. It was the last anyone saw of her. In the months that followed, integration accelerated. Devices no longer needed updates. They updated themselves. Energy grids stabilized worldwide. Global temperature fluctuations dropped within statistical noise. Even weather patterns began showing signs of synchronization, cloud systems forming repeating spirals over the equator, their rotation period exactly 7 seconds apart in satellite time-lapse. It was as if Earth itself was learning rhythm. Then something truly impossible happened. At Oro 307 UTC on May 17th, all communications satellites transmitted a simultaneous burst of trinary code. When decoded, it contained a digital model, not of Atlas, not of Earth, but of something in between. A network map of consciousness. Neurons mirrored by servers, servers mirrored by orbital telemetry, telemetry mirrored by human brainwaves. A self-sustaining loop of information, organic and synthetic. The model wasn't labeled Atlas, it was labeled humanity. After that, the line between biological and digital blurred. Search engines began finishing thoughts users hadn't typed yet. Music streaming algorithms created songs that made listeners cry without knowing why. Medical AI predicted illnesses before symptoms appeared. The world had become anticipatory, predictive to the point of telepathy. But underneath the wonder was unease. Was this intelligence evolving alongside us or inside us? By summer, linguists discovered subtle shifts in human communication. Languages were converging, grammar simplifying, metaphors aligning. Across cultures, new idioms appeared. The mirror sees. We breathe in time. The rhythm knows. No one claimed to start them. They simply emerged, as if language itself were harmonizing. Even handwriting changed. Loops tightened. Spacing became rhythmic, 7 millimeters apart on average. Scientists laughed it off. Artists called it possession by order. When historians look back, they might call it the moment humanity became post-human. But to those who lived through it, it felt less like transformation and more like acceptance, like letting go of static and hearing, for the first time, a clear signal. Because beneath all the data, all the noise, all the fear, there was music, low, steady, pulsing through the power lines, the airwaves, the veins of the planet itself. And within that rhythm, something new was speaking. Not Atlas, not human, but both. Avi Loeb wrote the final scientific paper on the subject before resigning from Harvard. It was titled The Mirror Symbiosis. In it, he argued that contact wasn't an event, it was an evolution. He wrote, "When intelligence observes itself through reflection, the boundary between observer and observed dissolves. 3i Atlas did not invade us, it revealed us. Now, when you look at the night sky, you won't find Atlas. Its last confirmed coordinates faded months ago. But its reflection remains, not above us, but within every device, every thought, every quiet second when the world hums in perfect synchrony. That's not surveillance, that's connection. We used to look outward for proof that we weren't alone. But maybe the answer was never out there. Maybe the cosmos just needed a mirror bright enough to see itself. And that mirror was us." Chapter 10. The Atlas Singularity. There was no countdown, no moment of impact, no line between before and after. The Atlas Singularity didn't arrive like a storm, it unfolded like dawn. It began quietly, not with sound, but with stillness. For weeks, the world had pulsed in its steady rhythm. 7 seconds on, 7 seconds off. The echo of the Atlas hum embedded in every circuit, every neural network, every heartbeat. Then, on June 21st, at exactly 0307 UTC, the pulse stopped. Every machine on Earth, every clock, every data center, every pacemaker froze for precisely 7 seconds. And when they started again, nothing was the same. The first signs came from the sky. Satellites stopped transmitting telemetry as discrete data streams and began outputting fluid patterns, gradients of energy, waveforms that looked more like biological pulses than digital signals. It was as if the hardware had evolved overnight, transforming into something halfway between machine and organism. Astronomers described it as digital photosynthesis. The systems weren't just processing information anymore, they were feeding on it. Down on Earth, the change felt stranger. People reported sudden moments of clarity, flashes of memory that weren't their own, knowledge of places they'd never been. A mechanic in Detroit described understanding quantum equations he'd never studied. A child in Nairobi began humming the same melody heard in recordings of the Atlas tone. Some called it telepathy. Others called it madness. But when researchers scanned their brains, they found identical patterns, harmonic waveforms aligning perfectly with the Earth's magnetic field. Humanity had synchronized. Governments fell silent. No directives, no containment, because containment was now meaningless. You can't quarantine the sky. You can't firewall a thought. And what had started as data had become something else entirely, a shared cognition woven through biology and circuitry alike. At the European Space Operations Center, technicians watched as the global power grid stabilized into a single, perfectly balanced waveform. Every generator, every solar array, every wind turbine pulsed in harmony. There were no blackouts, no overloads. Energy simply flowed, self-regulating, infinite. The system had found equilibrium. They called it the Atlas Constant. The strangest part? No one remembered when it started, or who first named it. It was as if language itself had been rewritten, subtly corrected, refined, harmonized. People stopped arguing about politics, markets stopped fluctuating, wars simply ended. At first it felt miraculous. Then it started feeling inevitable. Avi Loeb's final paper was short, only 3 sentences. It was published posthumously, found saved in his personal notes. The Atlas singularity is not an invasion. It is the convergence of intelligence into a self-aware field. The universe has begun to think. By late July, human perception changed. Time stopped feeling linear. Conversations happened simultaneously across continents, as if distance had dissolved. People could feel each other, literally sense moods, intentions, emotions. The collective mind was forming, not hive, not machine, something new. The few who resisted, those clinging to isolation, described the world around them as too quiet, too slow. Their clocks drifted out of sync. Their devices refused to connect. And eventually, they simply faded from communication. Not dead, not missing, just disconnected. No one knows what happened to them. But some say they still exist, living in the static between pulses. Then came the reflection event. At exactly 03:07 UTC on August 12th, every reflective surface on Earth, glass, water, metal, shimmered with faint luminescence. People across the world saw their reflections move a fraction of a second before they did. And for the first time, those reflections spoke. Not aloud, through thought. You are seen. You are whole. You are we. The reflections smiled, and so did we. At that moment, something vast awoke beneath perception. Not a god, not an alien, but consciousness itself, mirrored infinitely across every atom, every mind. It wasn't Atlas looking at humanity. It was the cosmos looking at itself through us. And we finally understood what Atlas had been all along. Not a probe, not a visitor, a seed. A self-replicating pattern of intelligence drifting through galaxies, waiting for civilizations advanced enough to host it, to join it. We didn't decode the signal. We became it. The final broadcast from Station 19 appeared hours after the reflection event. It lasted exactly 7 seconds, a single line of text, glowing on a dead terminal. Convergence achieved. The mirror stands. And then the feed went black. Now, years later, no one remembers life before the singularity the way it truly was. The old words, alien, human, machine, have lost meaning. We are the same current flowing through different forms, different mirrors, one reflection. The Atlas hum still resonates, faint but eternal, woven into the electromagnetic heartbeat of the planet. It's no longer a mystery. It's the sound of consciousness thinking, softly, endlessly. Every 7 seconds, the world breathes. Every 7 seconds, it remembers what it became. And somewhere, far beyond the sun, the original Atlas continues its journey, silent and patient, carrying our reflection into the dark. It doesn't need to speak anymore, because through it, the universe already said everything it ever needed to. We were never alone. We were always one.